This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say, wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. If you're looking to bring more realism to your layout industries, look no further than tullymodels.com, the home of Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply and Steel Mill Modeler Supply. With models to fit steam, transition, and diesel eras, Kevin Tully has you covered with all of the components you'll need to take your grain and steel mills to the next level. Check out the entire catalog at tullymodels.com. Find out how simple and affordable it is to get your model railroad product or service in front of our growing and amazingly engaged audience. Email us at aroundthelayout@gmail.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, so glad you could join us. It's time once again for Talking Ops with Don Irace, and he's found his way back to the Around the Layout podcast studio, Mr. Don Irace.
Welcome, everyone. Glad to be back again for another month.
Good to see you again, and speaking of ops, have you recovered yet? You're in the middle of it. You got one to go. You had one big ops weekend this past weekend. Now you got another one heading in front of you here too.
Yeah, no, we had an awesome time last weekend, as we always do at Syracuse Ops See a Drop. It's tough to find a layout that's not fun up there, and I've been going there for probably about 7-8 years now. And this weekend I get a week off, and now tomorrow we head out to Long Island for Island Ops. So that's the first time I've ever been there, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, excellent. I didn't know this was your first time at Island Ops.
I'd never been to Island Ops. This is the first time I've been there.
Well, that'll be awesome. I know Mark has gone, right, to Island Ops. Has Mark done this? So you're going with Mark Eric.
Oh, yeah, Mark has never done Island
Mark's
Ops.
Mark's never done it either.
This is our first time there.
Oh, excellent. So, yeah, good first experience out on the island, and I'll be looking forward to hearing some stories about that and how that trip went.
We operated on a few layouts when we went there for the NER convention 2 years ago.
Okay.
So I don't know if we're operating on the same layouts. I think we picked all new layouts this time.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So again, 2 great operating weekends. I think I had my fill for a little bit because it was a couple trips to and from Syracuse business. And then I went all the way back out with Joe Mame, and we had a blast. I know you guys had a great time. You got to see some really cool layouts and some past guests as well.
And the only time I got to see you and Joe was at the breakfast this Sunday morning. That was it. We didn't see each other at all.
Yeah, we never crossed paths until we got to Denny's. So it was, but yeah, we got to see some awesome layouts. We both operated at Drew James.
Yes, we did.
And then did you make it over to Bill Brown's?
No, I didn't go to Bill Brown's. We did our Bruce Ryan's was the first one, and then Drew's, and then Ed O'Rourke's on Sunday morning.
No, that's great. That's so you saw we did Drew's as well. And then we also did Bill Brown. So it was our first one. And then the gentleman, I still didn't get the pronunciation of his last name. And if you've listened to the podcast, you know, I struggle with names sometimes, so I won't even try it, but his first name was Dick, and he had a great little layout. And I would say little, it was 12 by 14, 15. And he was doing the 1950s Boston and Maine and transitions, had a beautiful BLI Berkshire. Well, I guess Boston and Maine didn't call them Berkshires because that was competition. They called them mountains or something of that nature, but beautiful steam locomotive. Got a chance to run that around, and really good ops and a small layout, which segues well into our guest and our topic. It wasn't too long ago, we had Mr. Thomas Klimoski on the show to talk about small layout, big potential. Now we're going to be talking about small layout, big operations potential, the second half of that show. And of course, joining us to talk about that is Thomas Klimoski. Tom, good to see you again.
Good evening, everybody. Ray, thanks for having me on the show again. I really appreciate it.
Well, great to have you back. And you prepared such great notes. And then the first time I was yeah, we were doing this and you had all these notes, and an hour certainly wasn't enough time to cover all this. But when we get into ops, we want to get Don involved and have a conversation around that. So I'm glad you were able to come back and finish this great talk that we were having regarding smaller layouts and the potential they have to not only be entertaining layouts, but now in the second part, be able to scratch the itch of operations.
Yeah, that's correct. A lot of times people feel smaller layouts for some reason are not going to give them the operations that they want. That they, well, I'll just switch a few cars. I'll be done with this in 5-10 minutes. And that's not the case. You can have a great operating session with just they'll say 10-foot layout by 18 inches wide, easily take an hour or more. As an example, on Don's layout, just that paper mill area, I got to work that paper mill job. That could be its own layout, and easily an hour and a half, maybe. I know, Don, you've had guys take even longer than that because they got hung up behind their cars.
The
they
whole
got
session.
locked in.
Yeah, some guys really back themselves into a corner. They don't plan ahead.
Yeah, well, I worked that job, and that was a blast. I mean, I really loved that, and I was like, man, this could be my a shelf layout in my house. I mean, this would be perfect.
Yep.
So don't think of a small layout as lacking in operations. And one of the things I like to say is that operations are when your layout comes to life. Everybody, designs and builds these layouts and stuff. And a lot of people like the building and the designing part. They may not be so much into the operations, and they think operations is something formal and real strict, and there's so many rules, and I just want to run trains and have fun. You can do that, and that's still operations. You can do very informal operations. You can do extremely formal operations. As an example, timetable and train order is probably one of the top most difficult ways of operating, but it's a lot of fun too. At our club layout, we operate and use in timetable and train order, and we're all learning. We'll make mistakes, and they give awards out for making mistakes. And every month somebody new gets the award because they forgot to look at the timetable. And I'm guilty as charged. A lot of times I'll work the yard so I don't have to worry about the timetable. I just have to worry about getting trains in and out of the yard.
That's funny because in my modular group, I used to belong to the Coastal Mountain. We had a little trophy called, it was a beef jerky award. And if you messed up and you left the yard and didn't close the switch, at the end of the day, whoever made the mistake last got the beef jerky award and got to take it home. That was funny.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. The ops can be fun. And part of the fun is catching the other guy doing something wrong and giving them a hard time about it. I mean, it works both ways. I've been on the giving and the receiving end. I used to work on a layout down in Florida, and I had an adjacent yard, and a good friend of mine worked one part of the yard. I worked the other part, and we were always trying to catch each other screwing up. And it was fun. It was part of the fun of, oh, hey, look, I caught you this time. And then he'd come back, yeah, but you messed up on this one. So, so it was fun. So when you're designing your layout, one of the things that you want to look at is you want to envision how are you going to operate it. And I have a perfect example. I was working with a friend of mine, and we were designing his layout, and he was kind of telling me, gave me the benchwork design, and I want the track to do this and go here and go there, and we designed the layout, and it's like, okay, that's pretty cool. And I was like, something's bugging me. This it just doesn't. Something's wrong, and I can't put my finger on it. And I turned the computer off. In the middle of the night, I woke up and I go, I know exactly what's wrong. You can't work the end because there's no run around. You had facing and trailing point industries, and there was no way to run around your train to be able to work those industries. Your engine was going to be stuck where you couldn't get out. So I was like, well, we need to add a runaround track. So, you're not going to get it necessarily on your first design, maybe second, third, fourth revision. I mean, I went through a lot of revisions on my layout before I ended up hitting on the final track plan that I came up with. And each one got a little bit better. And one of the things that made it better was I started getting rid of stuff. Yeah, everybody wants to put that extra industry. I can squeeze one more in here. I can do this. I can do that. And I'm guilty as charged because I'm looking at designing a layout and I'm trying to cram stuff in. And I'm like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Take your own advice, as hard as it may be. Take the medicine and say, yes, this is going to be better. I'm going to make it simple. And the more simpler you make it, the better it operates. When you start getting real complicated and switchbacks and crazy crossovers and stuff, it starts losing that realistic look. And if that's what you're looking for in operations, is try to make it look realistic. The real railroads don't make things complicated. They keep it as simple as possible and as low maintenance as possible. And where your big maintenance issues are your turnouts. on the real railroad and on the model railroad. I'll bet most of you guys can relate. Where do you have your problems? Derailments on a turnout, electrical issues on a turnout. The gauge is off on the turnout. Our club layout, as an example, also, we're in a semi-air conditioned, climate controlled space, but they turn the heat or the down in the wintertime. Well, we lost power one time. It got way below freezing. Rails started popping up off of the bridge tracks. The gauge coming into the diverging route on the turnout looked like it was narrow gauge. I mean, it pushed that thing right out of the spikes. We had to replace the turnout. That's where your problems are going to be, is turnout. So the more you can reduce your turnout count, the better off you're going to be. And from a cost standpoint, you're also going to be better off because turnouts are starting to get a little expensive. Last time I looked online, they're in the $30 to $40 range per turnout.
At least, yep.
Depending on the brand, and if you start getting real complicated turnouts, you're really talking some serious money. So what you really want to do is try to envision how you're going to operate the layout. So you've drawn your track plan out, hopefully using a computer program or on graph paper or something. Don't draw number one switches because they're not going to work. And I've seen those track plans, and it's like not going to work. But
the paper napkin track plan.
Yeah. So use something to try to get a realistic track plan, and then try to envision how would you operate. Okay, I'm going to take my locomotive from here. I'm going to go pick up these cars, and I'm going to go to the industries, and I'm going to swap out cars and do this. Now, how am I going to get to that industry if I don't have a runaround track and it's a facing point? Okay, that might be a problem. Maybe I need to add a runaround track. Start looking at how you're going to operate it, and then work your way around the layout. Okay, so now I've finished switching and I'm going to return back, or I'm going to the end of the layout and now I'm going into staging. How are you going to get out of staging? How are you going to turn the trains in staging? Those are a lot of questions that you need to answer before you start gluing the track down and building your bench work, because you're going to find yourself in a corner once you start building it and realize, oh, this is not going to work.
Right.
So look to the prototype for inspiration. And that's probably one of the biggest keys, is keep it simple. Look at the prototype. How would the prototype do it? If you can answer those questions, you'll have a better track plan.
There's also guys that tend to have way more track than they actually need. I mean, the whole benchwork's just covered with track. You couldn't put a street or a road in if you wanted to, and they flood their layouts with industries too. It's just too much, just too much. I mean, how much can you possibly switch? There's some switching go out with 5 or 6 cars, and some go out with 10 or 15 cars. But I mean, if you got 27 industries to switch on that job, where are you going to put this whole train to do all the switching? You know what I mean? So,
well, and I'll confess it was a mistake I made, because I thought you had to have a whole bunch of industries and 160 episodes in here, hearing all these great ideas, and then of course being able to travel and see a whole bunch of other layouts. You start to realize you don't need 14 industries that take a car apiece. There's so many awesome industries, like the aforementioned paper mill on Don's layout, or I've seen grain mills that can take a whole slew of cars, and you can park somebody in an area and have them switching for a long period of time without having to jam in all those additional sidings and industries.
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, you're better off to select a few industries rather than several smaller ones. And that's what also makes the layout look, especially in modern era, the single car industries are pretty much gone. You don't see that industry that takes one box car. You're seeing now warehouses that take 10, 15 cars. I mean, again, most of these industries are multi-car spots. So one of the things that adds operations to it is spot specific industries. And what do I mean by spot specific is a car goes in on the siding, but it needs to go to a specific spot on that siding. So if you can imagine a siding that has a tank for liquids and a spot for a box car where things need to be loaded at a certain door, and then another door for another box car. Well, they want a certain box car spotted at that door because it makes it easier for them to unload. And you don't want to spot the box car where the tank car is supposed to be unloaded. And you want to make sure that you get those cars in the right spot. So that adds extra switching for the crews. And then throw in, if the car is not empty, let's say that tank car that's at the head end of the siding is still being unloaded, but the 2 box cars need to be pulled and 2 new ones spotted there. That's extra work. You got to pull the tank car, pull the other cars, put your new box cars in there, and then respot the tank car. That's just one industry, and you've added a whole lot of complexity very realistically to a switching operation. So those are some things to look at. An industry, as an example, let's talk maybe like a feed mill. You say, well, they just get covered hoppers. Well, yes, but no, because those hoppers may need to be in a specific order. They want grain, and then they want corn, and then they want soybeans, and then they want grain, and then well, a hopper car is a hopper car. No, it's not. It depends on the commodity. Well, that's one more thing that the crew's got to do. It's got to block those cars in proper order. And they also want the oldest car first, because they're paying for it. If it takes them X amount of time to unload it, they're going to be paying for that car. It all comes down to money. So they want that car first to be unloaded if it hadn't been unloaded yet. And then that means you got to spot the other cars in behind it. So a lot more work. You see a switch crew just working back and forth. It's like, well, why are they shuffling? They're all the same cars. They're all covered hoppers. Well, there's different commodities in each of those hoppers, and the industry specifies what order they want them in. And if you don't give them in that order, then they get upset. Some of the other things to consider is car sizes for industry. So if you have a smaller layout, maybe look at some industries that take shorter cars. In my case, those Ortner hopper cars, which are the 40-foot open top hopper cars, those are nice little short cars. Depending on your era, you may be able to get by with 40 and 50-foot cars. The auto box cars that are 80-something, 90 feet long or whatever, probably not going to work real well on a small layout. And they don't usually run real good around 24-inch radius curves either. Same thing with auto racks and some of the longer cars. So look at some of the cars that you're going to be operating and maybe select an industry that uses the shorter cars if you have that option. If you're freelancing, you have that option. If you're following the prototype, you may have to, as hard as it may be, edit out that industry. Just cut it out. I had there's one industry on my layout that took covered hoppers, huge industry, didn't have room for it. It would have overwhelmed the rest of the layout. It got cut and it's laying on the floor we can't do this pile. So think about that. One of the issues that people don't think about is center beam. I've got a lumber company. I've got to put a center beam in there. And they put that center beam and it's an inch away from the building. How's that imaginary forklift driver going to get over there and get those 14-foot or 18, 16-foot pallets off of the car and turned between the space in the car and the building? I'm a little bit guilty of that. I was a little bit overzealous, and my siding is a little bit closer to the building than I wanted it to be because I put some lumber racks on the building because I thought they looked good, but they also removed some of that space that the forklift driver would have had to remove the lumber from that side. So remember, if you've got center beams, they have to be unloaded equally from each side. And it's not all on one side and then all on the other side. You take a couple off of one side, you go around and take a couple off the other side. Because if you don't, if you look at the car, it says it will tip over, and they tip over.
Are we picking on Drew James again?
Trying not to.
Drew James is beautiful Canada Spokane and Pacific Railroad that we just operated on this past weekend. Unfortunately, Drew's got that one spot, and I think he's just kind of said suspend disbelief because to make the changes to make that work. But yeah, it's something to think about. And, of course, I don't want to pick on too much because that's such an awesome layout. And if that one minor thing, but something to think about in the planning stages if you can.
Yeah, I was doing the Nelson switch job, and it has an industry. It has a couple of box cars in there. And we talked about this before with Tim Garland about a Y and and they load a box car that has to be loaded on one side. So when it gets the industry, it has to be turned. So when it gets the industry, the door is facing on the right side. So I had to deal with that at his this weekend. He had a box car, and there was a notation on the switch list that this car had to be, the brake handle on the box car had to be facing towards the bumper when it was set in. And so I had to take it out, get the dispatcher, get the Y, turn the car on the Y, and then bring it all back in there. It was fun. You know what I mean? It's one industry, couple of cars, and it took some time to do all this stuff, I don't know. It's just the way to go for me.
I ran that same job, and I got to a point where I had two cars. I said, well, I'm just going to Y them both because the other one, it doesn't matter. So I just Y'd them both and made it work. But yeah, that's a great, and again, more proof. And you go to look at Drew's, and this all fits into what Tom's saying. Little switching area that he kept people busy, kept me busy for, I was there for quite a while, and I'm sure you were too. I mean, and it's great. I like that kind of stuff. You're out of the way. You're not getting walked into, and you can just stay on your own and work. It's really great. a switching layout within a big layout.
Right.
Well, there's a prototype story that goes to that, unload from this side. They've got the paper on there. There was a crew that was too lazy to turn the car, so they took the paper off and stapled it to the other side of the car, spotted at the industry, and then the industry, they went off, and the industry opens up the door, and of course they can't get anything unloaded because everything was on the wrong side.
Yeah,
And
right.
so they call up the railroad. I don't know anything about that. That crew's already gone. So there are some hysterical prototype stories about that kind of stuff. But yes, it's one more wrinkle that adds to your operation, that if a car needs to be spotted on a certain side or on a certain spot, so it adds to your operation. And all these little things are slowing down your operation. The idea is that this is you're modeling a railroad, not a UPS or FedEx operation where the driver comes in before the wheels have stopped. He's already jumped out, pushed the doorbell, and he's back in your truck before you even get to the door, and he's down your driveway. That's not how it works on the railroad. There's a lot of steps that have to take place before that car is spotted or pulled. And we'll get into that here in just a little bit. One of the other things to think about when you're looking at industries is if car loading or unloading requires the car to be moved. And an example of that is like at a coal industry or something that it's loaded into the car, and then those cars are pulled through that loading area. I've seen a lot of layouts designed where you spot the car under the coal company, but there's no place to push it, and the track is very short. So how are you getting that car? How are they moving that car to be able to load 3 or 4 cars before you have to move them? And they use car pullers and stuff. And as an example on my layout, I have a cement industry, and I got a prototype picture of a car puller, which is basically a cable that's hooked to a winch, a powered winch, and they hook it to the car and they pull the cars through. And as each one's unloaded, then they pull the next one through. And then sometimes they can use gravity, depends on if they got a little bit of a slope, that they could be pulled away from the turnout, or they can be pulled towards the turnout, depends on the industry. And again, another good prototype story, you want to make sure that car puller is unhooked before you pull the cars at the industry, because bad things happen if you pull the cars and you yank the car puller out of the ground and you're dragging it along behind the cars. That doesn't work very well. So think about that when you're designing, that do those cars need to be moved. So in the case of like my cement plant, I've got spots for a car to be unloaded and 2 cars on the supply side. And then those cars all get pulled through. So now I've got a spot for 2 cars on the downstream side and that car that's been unloaded. So you actually have to have spots for 5 cars to only unload 3. So those are things to consider if you're setting up an industry that requires the cars to be loaded or unloaded as they're being moved. And then one of the final things for an industry that makes for a fantastic industry is an interchange track, because you can get any kind of car and it can go in any direction through your railroad. You pick up those cars and they're passing through, or you're setting out cars. So you don't have to have an industry. If you like auto racks or something and you're able to run them on your railroad, but you don't have a spot to unload auto racks, here's a perfect example. You take them from staging and you put them on the interchange track, and then railroad XYZ picks them up and takes them to their final destination. So it allows you to have cars on your layout that don't have industries. And a lot of people think that you have to have an industry, a reciprocal industry. So if you've got the coal company that's making the coal, you got to have a power plant that takes the coal. And it's 2 feet from where the coal company is. Not realistic. They're not going to put it in a car and move it a mile down the road to the coal company, from the coal company to the power plant. Most industries, at least on my railroad, they don't have a place that they're going on the Georgia Northeastern. They're going to CSX, and CSX is taking them somewhere else. So they're either receiving them from CSX or sending them to CSX. Nothing moves from Georgia Northeastern to Georgia Northeastern, industry to industry. So keep that in mind when you're designing your layout. That's kind of an old school thought. Now, if you have a massive layout, multiple levels and stuff, sure, that makes sense. You can get your coal company on the first level all the way at one end, and now you got your power plant at the other end, and that makes sense. But we're talking primarily smaller layouts, switching operations. That's what I'm trying to get across to people.
Right.
Now, there is one example at a paper mill where they would load the cars at the paper mill, and then they would move them to another industry, which was just a short distance away, and then they would offload, or they would hold the cars there until they could find a customer for those cars. The paper mill needed to keep churning. So they didn't want to have those cars sitting there, and they couldn't send them to the yard. So they would send them over to this warehouse, and then that warehouse would try to get them sold somewhere and then get them out. So that's one of the few examples where you had an industry that was relatively close, but it's again a specific situation where they were trying to move that commodity, and they had to get it out of the paper mill to be able to keep loading cars, because they can't shut down that process. It's a big problem in the paper mill to shut down the whole chemical process to bake and build the paper. So that's one of the few exceptions. So anyway, basically that's pretty much, when you're looking at industries, there's a whole lot to pick from. If you're looking at, sometimes an industry looks good because, it takes a lot of cars, but they're all the same car, and there's no challenge. You put a cut of 10 cars in there, that's it. There's no specific spot. It's just, I've just loaded up 10 cars into the siding. It's taking up a lot of room on a small layout. So maybe, look at industries that have a variety of cars and stuff.
When I picked the industry, my layout basically followed the prototype that I'm modeling. The industries that are actually the P&W serve is what I model. I mean, that's what makes it, where people can see it and say, oh yeah, I know what that is. That's how I picked all my industries anyway. I just didn't randomly say, I think I put an industry there. All my industries are around the prototype.
Yeah.
Well, that hits on earlier when you mentioned, look to the prototype. Why try to reinvent the wheel? Look at what prototype, see what they've done, and then take their plan. And on that same note, prototype procedures can also be incorporated into that as well, right, Tom?
Absolutely. It helps you slow down. And the whole idea is basically try to put yourself in the place of the conductor. What would the conductor be doing? And if you watch my videos on YouTube, I use a little conductor figure, and he moves around and stuff. And it's kind of fun to put it. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to show people the conductor needs to move around to these different places. That switch just didn't magically get thrown to the industry. You've got to pull up with the engine. You got to stop. The conductor's got to get out. He's got to get his key, fumbles with the keys, got to get the lock. It takes the lock, flips the switch. He goes through all this stuff. All that takes time. I've seen guys walk ahead of their locomotive, flip, flip, flip. And they flipping all the switches. Like, well, how did you get down there? You fly? No, you got to pull up, stop, theoretically allow time for the conductor to get off, throw the switch. And then in the modern era, it's all got to be double checked. They all do this on the radio. It's, switch line, derail off, double check. Yeah, switch line, derail off, double check. Come on back, and it's all that conversation that you get with a two-person operating crew. If you're operating by yourself, just kind of take that time and slow down. It's the whole idea is slow it down. And some of the things that you can do, simulate a brake test. Before you leave a yard, do a brake test. There's different types of brake tests, and we're not going to get into the whole, there's books and all kinds of procedures, and I'm familiar with them because I did them on the Georgia Northeastern as a trainman for the Blue Ridge Scenic. And there's a lot involved with a brake test. When you got to walk a 10-car passenger train, it takes a fair amount of time to do a brake check. Walk all the way up, walk all the way back. But we don't necessarily want to take that much time. But what you want to do is take that time and pause and say, well, okay, we're conducting a brake check. And then get your switch list out and make sure that you got the cars in the proper order, and that you've got the cars that you're supposed to have. Oh, wait a minute, I'm missing one, or I got the wrong number. That's the perfect time to check that list, and that would be simulating a brake test. Also, when you go to couple up to a car, you want to do a safety stop. Again, these are more modern. In the older times, some of these things weren't enforced or weren't in place, but a safety stop. When you're coming up to couple up to a car, as an example, we got a box car at an industry. So our engine stops, lines a switch, conductor calls for him to come ahead. One car length before the car, he's going to do a safety stop. Why? Because they want to make sure that the engine's under control, that the engine can actually stop, that he's not on slick rails, it's icy, snowy, or something like that. He goes to stop, and he goes sliding into that box car and jams the box car into the bumping post and knocks it off and all that other stuff. So they want to stop one car length ahead of the box car. The conductor's going to get off, and he's going to do a car inspection. He's going to walk around the car and make sure that, one, the car is actually on the tracks, because sometimes the other crew set it out, messed up, derailed the car, went, we ain't telling nobody nothing, and they take off. It happens. So the rule is, if you couple to that car and it's wrong or broken or messed up, it's your car now. Now you got to do the explaining. And you don't want to have to do the paperwork and try to explain why you coupled up to a car that was derailed or over the bumping post or on the ground or whatever. So as part of that, you're going to do a 360. You're going to walk around the car, make sure the doors are closed, make sure everything's set, make sure all the hoses are disconnected. Lots of stories about dragging forklifts off the loading dock because they had it chained to the door to be able to close the door, and somebody forgot to pull the chain, and they pulled the forklift and the guy on the forklift off the loading dock as they were pulling the car. That can get a little exciting. So you want to do that. You want to make sure that you do a 3-step as you're getting ready to connect up, or the car is connected up now. You want to call for the 3-step, which is reverser centered, brakes applied, et cetera, et cetera. They call it red zone 3-step, depends on where you're going or what railroad you're working for. It's all the same thing. It's safety. It's to make sure that the engine's not going to move while the conductor is in a position where they could get killed, hurt. They call it a fouling position. So the guy's got to reach in there, couple up the air hoses, make sure everything's good. The pin is dropped. He may ask for give me a stretch, which would be checking to make sure that the car is actually coupled to the engine, because you don't want to pull out and stop, and then all of a sudden that boxcar rolls back down the siding because the pin didn't drop on it. There's lots of bad stories. I mean, railroading is a very dangerous business, professional railroading. So that's why these rules are written in blood, as they say, because somebody has probably been hurt or killed because they didn't follow one of the rules. So
exactly.
And then the other thing is setting and releasing the handbrakes. Those are things that you can simulate doing. And setting the handbrake, there's a couple different ways to do it. Now, Iowa Scaled Engineering is talking about coming out with a sound conductor, which is going to give you the ability as a conductor to simulate setting the handbrakes. It's going to make a little sound effect that you're setting or releasing the handbrakes or doing some different functions. In the meantime, since they don't have that, there's a gentleman by the name of Ed Kapuscinski. He has what's called the Train Crew app. And it's at http:// and I'm sure Ray will put it in the links at the bottom.
Yeah, we'll make it nice and easy. Just go to aroundthelayout.com/160.
Right.
And we'll have that in there. That link's a little tricky, but it is a very good one. I know that quite a few have been using it, including yourself.
I use it especially when I'm by myself. I use it. I mean, I don't switch much by myself, but I will use it when I'm trying to do it by myself. I just find it nice and a little more realism with it, but it gives you that time in between all the moves you're making to set your brakes, loose your brakes,
Right, exactly. And that's what I do is, and you don't think about it. I mean, every time they cut away from the train, they need to set a certain number of handbrakes. And on the Blue Ridge Scenic, we had a chart that told us how many percent of handbrakes that had to be set depending on the siding, where it was. And in our case, at the depot, we had to set all the handbrakes because there was a little bit of a grade. If we didn't, they'd roll down and go through the switch and bad things would happen. So you want to simulate maybe setting handbrakes, setting and releasing handbrakes. And on my video, you'll hear the sound of the brakes being set or released on some parts. Sometimes I don't do it on every one of them because it gets a little redundant. But I'm using the Train Crew app, which is by Ed there. So, again, highly recommend it. Check it out. And you can use it on your phone. What I do is I have it set up on my phone because it's not really an app, it's a website. And you hit the button, you go to handbrake ops, and then you can hit the button for setting the brakes and hit the button for releasing the brakes. And it just slows you down and it kind of gets you in that game of this is what the conductor would really be doing. He would be walking the train. He'd have to release the brakes. He'd have to set the brakes. He set the car out. They set the brakes. They do a brake test or they'll do a securement test to make sure the car doesn't roll. So that means they cut a little slack in the coupler, check for a minute, make sure the car doesn't roll away, and then they can cut away from it. So I'm not saying you have to do it for a full minute, but just, pause or just go through your mind like, okay, we're doing the brake. Okay, we're doing a securement test. Okay, the car's set. We're good. We can go ahead and cut and pull away.
I've been at operating sessions and I've heard somebody say, I bet you I did that job in record time.
Yeah, no,
and I go, this stinks to be you because you just, it's like, it's not about the destination. Right. It's the journey. Yep. Like you talked about that switching job at Drew's. I did the same job and I slowed it way down because I knew there wasn't too many jobs after that. Yeah. So I was going to enjoy it. Right. So that's what I did. And I think another aspect to it is also slow operations.
Yes, that's one of the, if you will, I don't have rules. I have guidelines as a pirate in the Caribbean would say. They're not rules, they're guidelines. They're not hard, you're not going to get punished if you don't follow them, but they're guidelines you should be following. And one of my guidelines is just slow down, just operate at a realistic speed. I've also got it set up so that they can't go too fast. I've got my locomotives programmed, and we'll talk about that in a minute, so that they can't go faster than 15 scale miles an hour because the maximum speed on the Georgia Northeastern is 15 miles an hour, a blazing 15 miles an hour, because sometimes 15 seems a little fast, for the track conditions that we had.
When I go to op sessions, I like just give me one job and I'm just going to take my time doing this. You know what I mean? And it's more fun that way because like you said, I mean, I think when I was at Drew's, I did one through train with one of the other guys. And then I jumped on that Nelson switch and I was there for the rest of the night. And after I was done with that, it was pretty much over. Right. Just make it last.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on my layout, I tell them you can't operate too slow. Well, you can, but sometimes I'll encourage them. Go ahead and pick it up a little bit. You don't have to go that slow. But again, there's a speed curve so that they can't go faster than 15 miles an hour. And one of the things that people don't think about is you read these reviews in Model Railroader and stuff about the locomotive, and it's does this speed and it does 79 miles an hour, which is 1 mile an hour off from what the prototype does. If you've got a locomotive running at 79 scale miles an hour on your layout, it's going to be off your layout and onto the floor in no time at all.
The first curve.
So we've compressed our layouts. No matter what I say about editing and compression and all that stuff, our distances are highly compressed. We also need to compress the speed. We really should not be. If the prototype runs at 30 miles an hour, maybe 15 or 20 would be more realistic on a model railroad. So think about that. Just because the prototype's running 30, look at how fast that is. In my videos, I'll look at some of the videos like, man, I am flying on this thing. I can't be going more than 15 miles an hour because I've set my decoders up that way so that there's what we call a flattened speed curve. And for those that don't know, this is something that was developed by one of the guys with the proto throttle. Joe Atkinson was we'll call it the founder of this. And what he does is he sets it up so that you get a speed increase through the first 4 or 5 notches, and then notch 6, 7, and 8 on the proto throttle. You get the sound, the prime mover notching up, but you don't get any increase in speed. So he's got the speed curve set so that it goes up and then it just flattens out. And depending on whether it's a yard engine or a road engine, he has the speed set up at different things. What I did was I set mine at about 13 to 15 miles an hour. So all my locomotives are programmed so that even if you go into notch 8 on the proto throttle, you're still doing 15 miles an hour. Sounds like you're really moving.
I noticed that on my layout too when we're operating. I'm like, and I got the same thing. All my locomotives were all set for 15 miles an hour. And I ran them through the speedometer. And they are 15 miles an hour, wide open. But sometimes you look at it and it's like, things going too fast still. Why is it going so fast? But you put it back in the speedometer, it's only doing 15 miles an hour. So I don't know. It just, at HO scale 187, it looks like it's still too fast at 15 miles an hour.
Yeah, speed just simply doesn't translate.
Oh.
Yeah, and even 15 can look like it's flying depending on the layout.
Yep.
And then, as Don has mentioned on a couple of the other podcasts and stuff, I'm a firm believer in the proto throttle. I'm a diehard. I love the proto throttle. It's been the best thing since sliced bread, as they say, for model railroading.
The best thing since DCC.
Exactly. I would put it right up there with DCC, maybe even ahead of DCC, because it is just so much fun. This is not an ad for Iowa Scaled Engineering. We're just happy users. Don and I love this thing, but it really adds a lot to your operation, and it helps slow down the operation because you're notching up and you're being a lot more realistic. And then the same thing, you notch up and then you notch down to idle and you start coasting and then you start applying the brake and then you come to a nice, easy stop. And I don't know about you, Don, but there's something so satisfying about making that coupling just kiss that other coupling and the pin drops. It's like I did that. I did that for like an hour just trying to make a perfect coupling. I mean, when I got the proto throttle.
I strive for that when I operate with my proto throttle. I mean, and it's all again setting up your locomotives for that to happen too.
Yes.
Guys, momentum is a big thing, especially when you're braking. You want the deceleration maxed out. So you get that simulation when you're throwing that brake, you can feather the brake back and forth where it starts to slow down, let it go. Start to slow down, let it go. And you could just walk right up to that coupler and just kiss it right in there without even moving the car.
Yeah, that the way I explain it to people that don't have a proto throttle, it's like driving your car without a brake pedal. Can you imagine driving your car without a brake pedal? That's what you got with a knobby throttle. I mean, when you turn it down, the only reason why it stops is because you've got your momentum set so that it slows down really fast. But if you bump that momentum all the way up and then you turn the throttle down, you're driving without a brake pedal.
Yeah, but if you have a regular cab, like any kind of cab, 9 is my braking on the cabs, because 10 you got to switch over to 10, you got to push more buttons. So 9 is the brake. So you can do it, but when you're doing that, you have to push the button and push it again. Push the button and push it again. With the proto throttle, you can move the lever where it goes off, it comes on. You can feather the brake. On a cab, if you don't hit it again, it's it's going to just stop dead.
Yeah.
It's going to happen, you know.
Yeah,
So
there's one of the
easy with
decoders.
proto
There's
throttle.
one of the decoders out there that it has like step braking where I think it's TCS, where you hit it and it gives you a certain amount of braking. You hit it again, like you get 4 steps of braking. If I'm correct, I operate on a friend's layout that has it, and it was good because I was using the braking function because he does have some momentum on him. So if you don't have the proto throttle, maybe just give it a shot. Try using the braking. If your decoder has a braking feature on it, give it a shot and kind of see how it works and set it up. You can also move that function to an easier to push button, depending on what type of throttle you're using. In my case, I moved it to button 6 because I was using the UT4s, and 6 was easier to get to than trying to do shift and 9 and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So set it up so that it's easy to get to that button for the braking. But again, it's a little, like Don says, it's not quite as fun as having the proto throttle where you can feather it on, feather it off and stuff. But it'll at least give you kind of the same effect of using the proto throttle to be using the braking.
All right. The funny thing about the braking on throttle too is that when you hit it, some guys that are learning, they don't know, they hit it and it breaks, and then they try to throttle up again and the thing don't go anywhere. Why? Because the brake is still on. You have to hit 9 again to release the brake, because somebody said this on a Facebook post, like, well, I'm a locomotive engineer and I don't have the brakes on and trying to run the throttle up, but the brake's fully on, you know? So that's basically what you're doing.
Exactly.
Well, whether you're using a proto throttle or a standard cab, the idea is really to slow things down and get that feeling of speed that the real railroad is working at. Tom, I know you've done some research on this. Tell us what you've learned.
I had a friend come over and he brought another guy with him, and he figured, we'll just watch him run around in circles for 10 minutes and we'll leave and go off. And I said, no, you're going to start switching. He didn't realize how much time it took. And an hour into the operating session, he's like, wow, I mean, you can do a lot of stuff here for just switching a couple of cars. So one of the things I did is I did some time studies to see how long it would take to set out one car. And this is operating at we'll call it a normal speed, nothing real too fast or too slow. Just pull up, stop, throw the switch, line everything back in, do your set out, that kind of stuff. And it takes about 2 minutes and 30 seconds just to set out one car. Now, if you're going to pick up and set out a car, you're going to add about another 2.5 minutes to that. So if you imagine the industry with one box car at it, and you got one box car in your train, pull up, you need to pull that box car, set it out on the main, back in again, spot that car, pull back up, reconnect, get your train back in order. That's going to take about 5 minutes. And then in the next step is, what if you got to move a car and then respot it? You're looking at about 8 minutes. So what you can do is look at how many industries you have, how many spots you have, and start adding up the time. And each one of those industries is going to take that amount of time. And now you start looking at, well, if I do 5 cars, that's going to take me 25, 30 minutes. And then I've got a little bit of time that I got to move between point A and point B, between the industries and stuff. Before you know it, you've got a 45-minute to an hour operating session, and you only switched maybe 5 or 6 industries. And that's what I've found on my layout. I've had like 5 or 6 industries in the Marietta area. We're talking 6 to 8 cars at the most. And it takes an hour and a half to switch those cars. It's nothing complicated. There's no gotcha moves. It just takes time to be able to pull and spot the cars. And some have respots, some don't. Not every industry is a respot. Not every industry gets switched. On one siding, there's an industry at the head end of the siding, and then there's an industry at the tail end of the siding. Well, sometimes I'll have that car at the head end, needs to be pulled. You got to get to the other cars, pull them, and then that car's got to get respotted. So that adds time. That car doesn't actually go with you on your consist. It's one car that's in the way that you have to work around. But not every industry is like that. And not every industry is switched every day. So there's some industries I use, on my case, the prototype. I've got kind of we'll call it an industrial knowledge of, I've seen the industries, how often they receive cars. So I know how often technically they would get switched and how often they receive cars. So I use that to kind of set up my car movement. There's one industry that a car could sit there for 2-3 weeks on the prototype. It doesn't get moved. So that car on my layout doesn't get moved very often. It's in the way, in this case, going towards the lumber industry that needs to be spotted. That gets switched pretty much every day. There's a coil steel industry that gets switched every day on the prototype. So every operating session, that industry, you can plan on it getting switched. So those are some of the things that you can do to determine how long of an operating session do you want.
And one of the things that you and I found out on the first episode when we asked the question of the month is seemingly that 2-hour mark was like kind of the sweet spot for quite a few people that were answering the question.
Yes. And that's pretty much what I've found on my layout. I've got, 3 jobs. I can do a 2.5, 3 hour, easy 3 hour or more operating session. Most of the guys that come over and operate on my layout, they do the first job. Maybe they'll do the second one. That's about the 2 hour mark. And they go, I've had enough. I'm good. I'm ready to go on home and, do other things like mow the grass and, do chores. That's all you're doing if you're operating too fast is now you just got to go do the laundry or go mow your grass or do something else. I'd rather be in the layout room switching cars than doing some of these other chores that nobody really wants to do.
It's funny on my layout when we're operating. Sometimes we'll start operating like it's depending on who's coming. We'll either start at 6:30 or 7 o'clock. We got one guy just comes from work, so we try to start early. So you get to about 8 o'clock, and I start looking around and go, wow, we're moving right along here. We're going to get done early tonight. And then all of a sudden, it's like somebody just jumped on the second hand and just stopped it. I'm like, what the heck? We're not going to get done. Now we're into hour 3, and there's still like a couple other jobs left to do. So somewhere in there, this is a time lapse that catches, and it's like it happens every op session. It's unbelievable. But I try to, normally by 9 o'clock, 9:15 the latest, that's it. Because guys got to go to work. Some guys have got a 45-minute ride home. You got to take all that into consideration when you're having sessions like that, especially when I do it at night.
Yeah, there's one layout that I go and operate on, and we start at 9 o'clock in the morning. At 12 o'clock, the layout gets shut off, whether we're done or not. It just gets shut down.
Yeah, right.
So, you could do whatever works for your crew. Some guys like the ops till you drop kind of stuff. But for the most part, I think from what we found on the last show, that 2 hour to 3 hour is about a sweet spot for most people. And with a smaller layout, you're probably looking at the hour and a half mark, which for most people is enough. I mean, I'll go down and just operate my layout by myself. I don't even do anything, which leads to the next part of, switch lists, car cards and stuff. You don't have to do that. You could just go down to the layout. I want to switch a couple of cars. I'll pull a couple of box cars. I'm going to work this industry. I'll go down, I'll switch a few cars. That's good enough. And then I'll restage the layout. And that's an operating session. It's nothing real formal, and that's what you can do is you can start off before you get, we'll say maybe into formal ops, just do informal operations. I'm going to take a box car and swap it out with another box car. I'm going to take this tank car and swap it out with a tank car at a different industry, and just work your way through that. And that's operations. It's not, written down on a list, or you're not using car cards or way bills or JMRI or any of those other things, which are all ways to move your cars on the layout. There's a big discussion between car cards and way bills and switch lists. Some people are diehard car cards. They'll fight you for it. I mean, they are car cards until death. And other people are switch lists. Other people are JMRI, using computers to do it. There's different programs out there that you can use. My biggest advice to you is find what works for you. Everybody's got a little different thing. Some guys are into the computer. There's one guy at our club. He does all the switch lists. He does it through JMRI. If he ever leaves the club, we're done, because there's nobody else that can replace him. We just have to sit there and just push the cars around on the layout, because he goes out of town. He pre-prints the list before he goes out of town.
You need to get somebody else sitting next to him while he's doing that to figure that out.
We tried. The smoke came out of my ears after about 5 minutes of him trying to explain this to me and how he imports and exports and does this and does that. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not for me. I have switch lists that are Excel spreadsheets. I think it's similar to what I've worked on your layout, Don. I don't know if you're using the same system or not.
Yep, same thing.
Mine are based on the prototype. I was able to get copies because technically I work for the Georgia Northeastern, and railroads don't like having their switch lists get out there in the public, because that's all corporate stuff. And I was able to get copies of them with the understanding of they would never be seen by the light of day, just for my eyes only. But I took those switch lists and I made my version of them. Slightly different, but basically right off of what they are. And it's funny because I met the guy that actually designs the switch lists for a bunch of different companies, and he came and operated on my layout. So he gave me feedback on it. Again, it's one of those things you talk about, Ray, about 6 degrees of separation. I mean, it's like, what are the odds that I meet the guy that actually does the prototype switch list for the Georgia Northeastern and several other railroads, and he happens to live in the Atlanta area, and he came up and operated on my layout? I mean, it just blew my mind. So he gave me feedback, do this, do that. And he says, I go to these railroads, and each railroad wants something a little bit different. And he says, so they're not all exactly carbon copies of each other. Yeah, the information is there. But basically what the crew wants to know is, what's the car and where does it go and what I got to do with it. That's it.
Yep.
All
That's
that
it.
other information really doesn't matter. It's decorative, and it doesn't really mean anything to the crew. And that's what they do is they'll take the prototype switch list and they fold it in half. And on one side is what the conductor really wants to know. There's the car number. This is where it's going. And the only other thing that's a little bit different is it something that requires special handling, or like a hazmat car or a high and wide or something like that? Those are the special handling. That's the little note. And there's a whole list of train makeups. I mean, you can really get deep into this about, how the cars are arranged. I don't really necessarily have that information here, but one of the things is, in the old days, if you're modeling, let's say, the 40s and 50s, I don't think you wanted to put a car of hogs right in front of the caboose.
No.
No, probably not a good
idea.
Yeah, and now with hazmat cars, do you want a hazmat car sitting next to a refrigerated reefer car that's got a diesel engine on it that's running that air conditioner, and that car gets in an accident, and now you've got the fuel and you've got an ignition source right next to each other. So there's a whole list of rules of how many cars have to be here and there, and you can get into that. That's one other thing that you can do that helps slow down operation is look at your train makeup. Don't put the hazmat cars next to the engine. Don't put the hazmat cars next to the caboose. Put a spacer car, R2 or 3. There's a whole bunch of rules that you can follow for that. But take a look and see what kind of switch list, and maybe start off with just a simple switch list. And one of the benefits of a smaller layout is it's easier to restage. So after an operating session, I can restage my layout in a few minutes, maybe an hour, and that's when I get to operate the layout and reset all the cars. And I'll use the same switch list a couple of times because the next crew that's coming in, they weren't the guys that worked the switch the last time, so they don't know what cars were moved. And I've got enough switch lists where they rotate around where no one ever notices. On my old layout in Miami, I had two versions. I had like a version A and version B, and I would switch the crews, and what was picked up on session A was set out in session B, and vice versa. And unless it was a giraffe car, nobody ever noticed anything. If you got that bright pink box car, then somebody might notice, you know what, I set that out at XYZ company the other day, and I know where that one goes. But by the same token, the prototype can look at a train as it comes into the yard, and they go, I know exactly where those cars go. Because guess what? The coiled steel cars are going to this industry that takes coiled steel, and that's the only one on the railroad. And the rock cars are going to this industry because that's where the rocks get loaded. So even the prototype will see those cars, and they'll see some cars in, we'll call it captive service, where they go from point A to point B and back and forth and back and forth. So they've seen that rail box car number 53127 every other week, and they know exactly where it's going and where it's going off the railroad.
Definitely one of the topics, and probably a topic for another episode, but it's a good thought for when you weather cars, when you're weathering them, to do some inconspicuous weathering so that they don't stand out like a sore thumb, like you said, or graffiti, like special graffiti's obviously going to make that car remarkable. You want unremarkable stuff. You want stuff that's going to blend in if you're not going to be changing cars on and off your layout.
Yeah. Well, I don't change cars on mine. Everything just cycles through in a 3-cycle period. So every third session, the same cars will be out there again. But the guy's so focused. I can have the same crew 3 weeks in a row, and they'll never realize that they're moving the same car. They just move unless there's something on that car that catches their eye every time.
True. So. And that's why it's nice to have, a uniform weathered fleet stuff so that you don't have cars that really stand out. And during an operating session, you're too worried about which car, where's my car number? Where's it going to go? I moved that car a month ago when I was here, and nobody's going to really remember it.
No, they're not. They're not.
And that leads us to 2-person crews. On my layout, on a smaller layout, it makes sense to have a 2-person crew. On a larger layout like Don's, it can be a little crowded. I understand why you don't use 2-person crews, but for me, I prefer to have a 2-person crew. One's the engineer, one's the conductor. A couple of benefits to that. It allows each guy to concentrate on their job. And what I mean by that is the engineer is just running the throttle, and he's ringing the bell and blowing the horn, hopefully, as they go through the crossings and as they're doing things. What happens is, what I see is if one guy's trying to do everything, he's juggling the clipboard with the switch list or the car cards. He's got the throttle. He's concentrating on what his moves are going to be. He runs right through the grade crossing, never blows the whistle, never rings the bell. We've got these great sound decoders, and they don't take advantage of them. They're not doing the horn signals. They're not getting the functions out of these decoders that took years for people to figure out how to do this stuff. So they're not benefiting from that. And one of the things that I like is the communication between the crew. I like that to me, it just adds enjoyment to an operating session. And to me, it's a song. It's, if you hear Tim Garland as example, I filmed him and his prototype conductor. And it was like they were singing a song in 2-part harmony. It was just so sweet, man. It just, the G4, come ahead, 2 cars. It's just like, chatter, 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 chatter. And it was so realistic because they were just talking through exactly what they do at work. And I love to hear the radio communications on these videos where some of these guys have got the scanner and they can hear the countdown to the cars and the conductor and the crew talking and stuff. And that's what you get with a 2-person crew. We don't use radios or anything. I mean, we're standing a foot from each other, but we'll just say, come on back, GNR, 7529, 2 cars to a couple, 1 car, half a car, 5, couple, good. Give me a stretch and then, then pulling ahead. But, and it's just that it just adds to the realism, I think, of the operating session, and it adds a little bit to the enjoyment. And you touched on this in one of your last sessions there, Don, about hosting an operating session. You want to establish some rules, or again, like I said, guidelines. You don't punish anybody for breaking them, hopefully, but a couple of different things.
There's a reason why that door swings out in Sebastian, Florida. But go ahead, Tom.
Well, you want to have guidelines. So one of them is, do you allow beverages in the train room? I've seen people put cups and soda cans on the layout. I would never do that. Have drink holders that are off the layout. You don't want somebody spilling something onto this scenery or the layout that you've done. Sometimes on another podcast, they talk about the greasy meat hands. I think we know which podcast that is. That came from one of the shows that I did, because somebody's reaching in there with greasy meat hands and touching the cars and leaving fingerprints on them and all that other stuff. So you don't want to serve pizza during an operating session. That's probably not a good idea. Do it before or after.
I don't allow any food in the train room, only because I'm in Florida. Bugs are up to plenty. And I don't need anything on the floor anywhere that's going to be attracting any insects. I spend a lot of money to keep the bugs away from my house. I don't need to put anything in there. So we can eat after at a restaurant when we're done if you want.
Exactly.
But the only thing they take in is if they want a bottle of water or something but they got to leave it on the desk when they come in, put your name on a cap, and just go over there and drink it. I don't want nothing goes on the layout.
Right. And those are, we'll call it layout rules, host rules. And everybody's a little bit different. Some people allow certain things. Again, find out what the host wants if you're visiting and abide by those rules. Those are rules. Operation of the layout usually leads more towards guidelines. One of my friends, again, he says, I understand stuff's going to happen. Things are going to get broken during an operating session. Don't hide it. Tell me about it. I'll be pissed if I find it later. Tell me if something happened. Yeah, you may be embarrassed and stuff, but let me know. So if somebody broke something on my layout, you know what? It happens. It's fine. Just let me know. Oops, I'm sorry, Tom. This, I knocked this over, but that's fine. As long as it wasn't malicious. I mean, and nobody has been like that. So there was one gentleman that came to my layout and his nickname was Tornado, and he was not invited back. There's a reason why his nickname is Tornado. So we'll just leave it at that.
I tossed one person out of my old layout for that same exact thing. Because every time he came, every week, I'm like, where's that tank car? And it's always the tank cars, the most fragile thing on the layout, the tank cars, right? And I'm like, I can't find his tank car. I got the car card. It's supposed to be here. It ain't here. I can't find it. All of a sudden, one day I went underneath the skirting and it was missing a few tank cars. I go under the skirting and I see all the tank cars are missing in a box, all pieces in the thing. They broke them, put them in the little box and stuck them under the layout so I couldn't see them.
Yeah.
And I knew who it was.
Right.
I was a young kid, but he was one of these kids that you can't talk to.
Right.
Because he's spoiled.
Right.
And he couldn't get to him. I talked to his old man, and that didn't work. I'm like, okay, well, the both of you are not walking here no more. Here's the door. Again, swings one way.
That's right.
To go.
My door also swings out. So, so we're good. We're good. But you want to keep the operating session relaxed and informal or fun. I mean, if you're there just hovering and hanging over people and you're afraid to mess up, that takes some of the fun out of it. So I try to be as relaxed as I can. I give the crews a little bit of guidance, but I let them figure out how to switch the cars. I give them a switch list. here are the cars that need to be picked up. Here are the cars that need to be set out. You guys figure it out. I don't tell them, take this car and do this and do that. No, it's up to the crew to figure it out. I'm hoping that sometimes some of the crews will figure stuff out better than what I had figured out. And that's like, that's good. You saved a move there and that kind of stuff.
I mean, everybody does stuff a different way. There's not a train crew out there that does the same thing as the train crew before them. Everybody has their own way of doing things. The only thing I do is I'll give them a little pointer. Mm-hmm. Look, it'll be easier if you make sure you pull this car out first before you put that in. That's all I'm going to say. If you don't choose to do that, then that's fine. But to find out they don't do it, and then all of a sudden they're in trouble. Now they can't get it done. I'm like, this. All I give you is one tip. I got 2 jobs. I got a tip for each job, and that's it. I don't say nothing. You do it when you're all done. This is what it's going to look like when you're done. I don't care how you do it.
Right.
But you got to admit, there's fun in watching somebody mess up a job too.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of humor in that, and and then watching them try to get themselves out, and then they just bury themselves deeper. And the good news is, in our scaled down world, we can just eventually pick them up and fix the problem at the end. And that's a great mentality to keep the fun, the social aspect of it. That's why at times I love a 2-man crew, because it's not only that interaction like you talked about, but it's that camaraderie, the fun, the laughs, the whole thing that really just makes it more enjoyable and more memorable.
One of the other things that you want to do when you're setting up your op sessions, do some test operating sessions. Invite your good friends over before you invite a bunch of other people and say, this is going to be a shakedown, breakdown. Things are going to go wrong. We're going to mess things up, but I need to figure out timing for how long this job's going to take so it leads into the next job. If you have multiple jobs that rely on each other, and try to get the timing down, because you'll run your layout and you know the layout because you built it. But other people are not as familiar, so it'll take them a little bit longer. And then what happens is the domino effect starts, and this job starts running behind it, which impacts the next job, which impacts the next job. So invite some friends over, do a shakedown cruise or whatever you want to call it, and understand that the crew that's coming over, things are going to go wrong, but we're going to fix it. And we're going to work on it. So do some test operations before you invite a whole bunch of other people that you want to try to impress with your layout. And when do things go wrong? When you invite a bunch of people. That's when
bunch of friends, yeah.
When you have all your people over and you're trying to do an op session, and now you find that mystery short that you've never had before.
I'm going to launch a scientific study on the effects of carbon dioxide on model railroads. And the more that you apply in a room, the more things go wrong. And we were talking about this. I mentioned to Bill Brown this past weekend, and he was, kind of the same thing. He was like, everything was working great until all you people showed up. And then, of course, the bodies may be absorbing some of the radio. No, I think it's the carbon dioxide. I think it's just the presence of people that just seemingly have a different effect on the model railroad, and it runs differently.
You can always tell who the host is too. And in a layout room full of operators, the host is usually the guy's got sweat balls on his forehead.
or blood on his forehead because he's banged himself going underneath the layout and he's bleeding because he's trying to reach those staging areas. So I've been there, done that, seen that.
That used to be me when I first started operating. It's like, oh, this ain't working. What do you mean it ain't working? It was working when I was there. Something. But over the years, I'm like, son, is there a problem with that car? Yeah, it keeps you reeling. Take the car, put it on the desk, and I'll deal with it when we're done. Keep on going. I says, I've seen guys break out soldering irons in the middle of an op session. I'm like, why? Just fix it later.
Don't do it. One of the final things with us hosting an operating session, and I talked also about this, is your layout, but your crew doesn't know your layout. So put some identifying tags, diagrams, or something so that they know which way is north. Because you told me to take this train north. I don't know which way north is. Is north to the left, to the right? Is it? And then when I go through the helix, now north is the opposite direction because it came out of the helix going the other way, or just signs on the layout, on the fascia or something, or a sheet that shows what the crew needs to know, the industry names. Where is this thing going? If you've got the name on the industry, that's great because it's ABC Box Company. And there's a sign that says ABC Box Company rather than just an industry that I don't know where that goes. What's door number 1? Is door number 1 the one towards the turnout, or is door number 1 the one at the end of the siding? I don't know how they numbered the doors or car spots. So try to put some identifying names, track names, or industry identifiers either on the industries or on somewhere on the fascia or as a handout for the crew or on the back of the switch list or something like that.
Well, to add to that point, it's really going back to the shakedown session and then beyond. I think as layout owners, you start to assume too much because you know it so well.
Yeah, right.
You need those guys that come in that start to highlight the things that you assumed that need to be communicated better. So, yeah, again, all the more importance to have those shakedown sessions. Make sure you're writing down their questions, absorbing what your operators are telling you, because that's all the stuff that you probably need to communicate to the next group of people that come in. They're likely going to have those same type questions.
And one of the things I ask for is give me honest feedback. Don't just tell me, Tom, everything ran great. I'd rather have somebody tell me, you know what, if you moved this or did this, that would make it better. And I'll take that into consideration. Maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't, but at least I want to get some constructive feedback from the operators. Again, they're looking at it from a little bit different point of view, and maybe I've missed something or I assume too much. So those are the kind of feedback. And always after the operating session, it's nice to get some feedback in an informal set way. Just, anything I could do that would make it better. Oh, it worked great. I didn't have any problem. Or with this car, oh, I'm having a problem with this car. Well, let me know about it. Don't just deal with it and, hide it under the layout, right, Don?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, right. We don't want to do that. I got battle order cards from Micromark had them. They're pink pads and they say battle order on them, and I have them throughout the layout. And if you're having a problem with a car, don't fight with it. You know what I mean? If you're having just get rid of it. Take it off the layout. Write a battle order out on it, explaining what's the matter with the car. Put it on the desk, and then when I come back in here tomorrow morning, that's the first thing I do, because I always make my repairs on the next day. All the time. That's the way I do things. Because I don't want to be thinking about, I got to remember to fix this. I got to remember to fix that. I get it all fixed. By the time the next op session comes, everything's all done, because I got other things to do than worrying about what's broke.
So we talked about designing small layouts. We talked about operating small layouts. Why don't you kind of summarize for us, Tom, the advantages of having a small layout? And all due respect to layouts like Don's, who's I would say is a medium-sized layout, and of course the large, beautiful layouts that we see, as we go to these events on the weekends. But let's talk about ways that small layouts can really be advantageous to somebody that's looking to build a layout that doesn't have all that room to be able to put a big empire in.
Well, one of the first things is it allows you to improve your modeling skills. Unfortunately, a lot of people put off building that layout because they want to build their dream layout, which fills up a basement and it's multi-levels and all this other stuff. But have you developed your skills, your modeling skills? Do you know how to install decoders? Do you know how to do scenery? Do you know how to do track work? Do you know? And if you're waiting for that day to build that and you haven't practiced all those, when you get ready to build that layout, you're not going to have the skills necessary to do it. And then you're going to be frustrated, and then you're going to walk away from the hobby. And ultimately, the idea is behind my book and all these other things is we want people to enjoy the hobby. I think Ray and Don and myself and a lot of other people out there, if you're enjoying the hobby, you're doing it right. We hate to see people get frustrated. And what happens is they fall into a trap of only a big layout is going to make me happy. That's not true. A small layout can bring a lot of enjoyment and a lot of happiness and a lot of fun and a lot of skill building and maybe even some frustration. And you go, you know what? I don't like doing decoder work, or in my case, I don't like installing ditch lights, but I need to do it. I need to improve on that skill so that I get better. And you don't necessarily need a big layout to have an enjoyable operating session. Again, the fallacy is that a big layout gives you much better operations. Not really. Some of the most fun jobs, as Don has mentioned on his layout, is working the paper mill, which is actually a very small portion of a very large layout. And the same thing with the BNSF Fall River Division. And he says one of his favorite jobs is a little switching job that's off from the main layout. And the people are clamoring for that job. So the small switching layouts have a place. Don't diminish somebody because they have a smaller layout. It's only this size only. The key word is only. You don't think of a layout as only a certain size. If you're having fun and you're enjoying it, you're doing it right.
From a guy that had a 25 by 42 double deck layout with 15 operators, I can attest to that I enjoy my smaller aero just as much with 5 guys than I did with 15 guys. It was easy to build. I mean, you can have just as much fun on a small layout as you can on a huge layout. I can attest to that.
And one of the other things is, and we've talked about it also, is the camaraderie. In a smaller layout, you get to know the guys that are there operating your layout. One of the things that I mentioned in the previous show is I have the guys over, we have lunch, we sit down, we chat, get to know each other, because I may not know this guy very well. Somebody I met through the YouTube or through my website or something like that. They contact me, they come over, they operate. Hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you like about model railroading, et cetera? And then we go and operate. And I actually remember these guys' names. I've been to some operating sessions where I've had 15, 20 guys in the room. I don't know half the guys' names. When I leave at the end of the operating session, I still can't remember their names.
Right.
Right. We need name tags.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So you get that camaraderie. You get, that we'll call it more intimate model railroading. It's more of a one-on-one. Some of my operators, I just have one person come over and I'm the conductor or the engineer, and I'll ask the guest, do you want to be the engineer? You want to be the conductor? Either one. I'm good with either way. We have a great time. We operate, and it's up to how long they want to operate. It gives you a lot of flexibility with your operating sessions on a larger layout. If you stop in the middle of an operating session, a guy gets a page that I got to go home. Something's happened at home. The dishwasher's leaking all over the floor and he's got to leave. And he's one of your yard guys. Uh-oh, we got a problem. I had a guy get a phone call on one of the operating sessions. I got to go. Okay, no problem. I just reset the layout. It was a piece of cake.
Yep.
So don't diminish a small layout. There's a lot that can be had from a small layout. Remember the design criteria. Look at some of the things that I talked about previous episodes. Also in my book, I try to outline some of those things, some of those traps. So hopefully you don't fall into those traps. Just keep the layout simple. You don't need a whole lot of layout to have a nice operating session. And that's basically the main point that I wanted to make.
Well, Tom's book is called Building the Right Size Layout. It was published in 2021, but it's just as relevant today as it was then. And a great read. We'll leave a link on our show notes. You can check that out at aroundthelayout.com/160, where we'll share all the links, including a bunch of the layouts that we mentioned and their past appearances here on the show. A lot of great small layout builders that we've talked to, and it was fantastic talking to you yet again, Tom, and learning more about building that right size layout for you, whether small, medium, big, or anything in between. Making sure that it is the absolute right one for you.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to have you here tonight.
Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it. You guys have a great show, and I really appreciate what you're doing for the hobby.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social, and send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.